And this is our 5th Indie Reading Room event, and I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. We started the Indie Reading Room series earlier this month as a way to respond to the challenging times we're living through. With so many book launches and festivals canceled, we wanted to support our publishing and literary community, so we're very happy to be able to celebrate all the new books and their authors, and we hope that you find this way of engaging with us online and boosting books as rewarding as we do. We all know how important independent publishing is to our literary culture and quite simply to our lives. We have a great turnout of people today. I'm seeing people from all over and around the country, and I encourage you to say hello in the chat box and drop some comments in. It's really nice. It gives the panelists a nice thing to see and shows support because we're not all actually in the same room clapping. So also, if you're unable to hear me, please let me know in the chat box. And for anyone new to Zoom, you can type your comments into the chat, and when the time comes for our questions and answers with our authors, you can type your questions into the Q&A section as well. It's at the bottom of the screen. You'll see the buttons there. So today our focus is on poetry, and I'm so excited to have you all with us to celebrate our 3 featured authors. Sadiqa De Meijer will be reading from her new collection, The Outer Wards, which is published by Véhicule Press. And then Daniela Elza will read from her new book, The Broken Boat, which is published by Mother Tongue Publishing. And closing out the readings will be Betsy Warland, the author of Lost Lagoon, Lost in Thought, which is published by Véhicule Press. Following each of the readings, we'll have a short Q&A period, so you'll have a chance to ask your questions. Please put them into the Q&A and not the chat box if you can, so that we can keep track of them, and then I will read them to our authors. And if you by chance already submitted your questions in advance, no worries, I have them queued up. Before we kick things off, we at All Lit Up wish to acknowledge the diversity of the First Peoples and recognize especially the territories of the Wendat, the Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Today, Toronto is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island and around the world, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work, to live, and to meet on this territory. All Lit Up is a project of the Literary Press Group, an association of 60 fiercely independent Canadian literary presses. I want to acknowledge the ongoing support of the Canadian government through the Canada Book Fund, the Canada Council for the Arts, and the Ontario Arts Council. Our public art funders play a critical role in sustaining Canadian literary culture, and we couldn't do what we do without them. And of course, once again, we'd like to thank you all for being here today to join in celebrating indie books, publishers, and our featured authors. So up first is Sadiqa De Meijer. Sadiqa De Meyer's debut collection, Leaving Howe Island, was a nominee for the 2014 Governor General's Award for English Language Poetry and also for the 2014 Pat Lowther Award. Her new book is The Outer Wards, published last month by Véhicule Press's poetry imprint, Signal Editions. And she has another book forthcoming, an essay collection entitled Alphabet, which will be published by Palimpsest Press. She lives with her family in Kingston, Ontario. About her book, The Outer Wards explores questions of maternal love and duty and the powerlessness that comes with the disruption of that role through illness. De Meyer writes, I recalibrated all catastrophes when you were born. Her poems track in visceral and tender detail the distraction, the exhaustion, the exhilaration, and fear of child rearing through crisis. For De Meyer, the experience was also a crisis of language and the struggle to find new terms for her state. Addressed in part to a child she calls my grievous spectacle, my dearest unpossessable, The Outer Wards is everywhere marked by a joy in words, their quick-fire turns, sumptuous sounds, and nursery rhyme seductions. I want to just add, one of the poems in this collection appeared in Best Canadian Poetry 2019, and 2 of the poems were finalists for Arc Poetry Magazine's Poem of the Year, of which one of them, the imaging department, won the contest. Over to you, Sadiqa.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Laura, and for organizing this reading. It's really wonderful to be able to read from the collection under the circumstances, and thank you all for attending. I can't see your faces, but I can imagine how lovely you are. And I did see, scrolling through the chat, I saw that people are listening from all over the country, which is really wonderful. So thank you so much. And I'll begin. Laura gave a really great description of the book, and the 3 poems that I'm going to read for you are instructive in nature. They're a set of 3 that are all titled How to something, and the first one is called How to Decline a Persistent Invitation. Yes, I'd love to, soon. A question mark, a dial tone. Her eyes are wide open, the midwife said. That dark blue ink I drowned in. Hang on, it won't be long. Rustles in the wall, lost stitch. The eyes, witch hazel, trusting. They used to drift, agape at sunlight in the canopy. Maybe later, love. Night winds, felled tree. Once I saw them studiously replicate my blinking. Now they grow a bird's transparent lids. I can't say when. Scrutiny, flowering borage. Where there's smoke. They know the weather of my face, the hole in my nightgown, the pill that's rolled under the bed. The next of the poems is called How to Take Meals in Semi-Darkness. Give thanks for this clock that still quarters the day, mutes the stupid jukebox in your skull a while. Utensils have no bearing. Here is a silent offering. Here is a shadowed field on a tray, a leaf, a root, a hen. Forms from the void, dim and earthly. Dear Sputnik, trust the cook. And the third of these poems is an instruction on how to converse with bedside visitors. There you are in your nimbus of daylight. Yeah, I feel as spectral as I look. Report to me in rations. That world has too much in it. Havoc of ticker tapes. I've outlived the tiny spider in the upper corner, who ventured sideways, shadow boxing, seemed to practice rituals of luck. Once, I was sure I heard my daughter's voice downstairs, but it was the plumbing. Still, I felt considerably cheered. I found that I don't curate my own past, its episodes projected in this room. Grade 10 geography class. We were 15. Why were we coloring maps? Mr. Ross lived for hockey, punched boys in the shoulder as greeting, otherwise fiddled with paper clips. He had a kind of boxy shape, and while he stood, I pictured him as North America. His breast pocket was Hudson's Bay, his belt the world's longest so-called undefended border, and then his penis of Florida, P and Keys, his tapered Mexican legs, and the palindrome of his shoes, a man, a plan, a canal, Panama. It comforts me when spring rains clatter on the corrugated roof, hundreds of typewriters doing the work I can't do. The poems I've pasted to walls peel off but leave traces, Basho wrote. Tell me of your life without evasions. Some days it seems improbable that there aren't hundreds of me, at large in rubber boots. Thank you.
Okay, time to unmute myself.
There we go.
Thank you for that beautiful reading. It's so special to hear you read your own work, and especially I love to hear authors read their poetry so that we can experience not only, the words on the page, but the music, the sound. Before I open up the floor to questions from the audience, I would like to kick us off. So these poems range through motherhood and illness, and they touch on a lot of other things as well. Life in a neighborhood, nature, people's attitudes about women, who gets tagged as foreign, our official histories, our hidden histories. I just feel that you've given voice to whole realms of experience. And I wonder, how do you think about audience or readers? Do you ever, while you're writing, consider a readership, the people that you're letting into your experience? And also, is the child the intended audience, as in some poems it seems to be? And in that case, are we just eavesdropping?
That's a great question. It's true that some of the poems are in direct address to the child. And what I found in others is that direct address, like the you in the poem, I was interested in directing that in different, towards different entities. And so not even just people, but there's a poem written towards death called Oh Death. There's another that addresses isolation itself. And so there are a few different ones that that get into the realm of not just a potential listener that is human, but also other things in my environment. And I found that it almost arose kind of naturally from starting out with that young child's perspective in the poem. And I think one of the poems begins with that idea that she greets everything on her path. And I thought, like, in that early world that of her childhood, everything was animate. And so I was interested in that sense in engaging with things in that way myself. But when you talk about a general readership, no, I think I have that in mind sometimes with essays, because they tend to be a bit more positional in nature, or the sense that I'm having a conversation with a reader. But with poetry, it really, I feel quite removed from that. I'm hearing the words in my mind, and I'm thinking much more about how they sound and how they resonate for me than I am about how that might be for someone else. So the gift in the end is learning how they did come across to someone, and whether they heard something in them that's it's much more of a surprise, because I'm not thinking of that.
Yeah. Interesting. I like the gift in the end. That's a good way of thinking about I guess reader response that might come your way. Also, just a reminder to everyone, please do just navigate to the bottom of the screen and drop questions in if you have any for Sadiqa. And I just wanted to ask as well, can you talk a little bit about the act of collecting the poems into a book, and the title, how it functions around the collection? Like, for example, when you were writing the poems, was there a starting point and an ending point in the time that you were covering that you just knew, this is it, I'm drawing the line here? Or also, when you were like pulling all the poems together, were there some that just in the end you didn't think fit and you wanted to, not include them? Like, how does that whole aspect of writing work?
Right. Well, in this case, the poems weren't necessarily written in the order that they appear in the book, but they do. I mean, that there is a narrative arc to them, in the sense that it's about early parenting, and then an injury happens to the speaker, the mother figure, and it's about that injury time and the recovery. And so that's how it was possible to structure them around that storyline in the end when I gathered them up. And then I mean, when you talk about when I was ready to draw the line, like, I have to be very honest, these poems were born under painful circumstances. And so in a sense, I was just really glad to round off the project and let them go. It really felt like a release that I could walk away from the experience, first of all, and then the manuscript sometime afterwards. Yeah, and Carmine Sternino, my editor, was really wonderful about, he took a few of the poems out at that point that weren't as strong, and so he had a really great eye for that. The Outer Wards actually was also his suggestion of a title, and I really liked it because it, I mean, the wards suggest some of the things that you already talked about, of landscape and neighborhood. Also the idea of a child being a ward of the state, maternity ward, but also that sense of there being something about the edges of experience in it, like the outer wards of that illness, injury, those things take place kind of at the margins of experience. Yeah.
Oh, so interesting. Thank you for that. We have a question from Amy, who asks, if you mind her asking this, has the child read the poem?
No, I mean, I wouldn't be against that, but there hasn't been a huge level of interest in reading it. Although I would say that, I mean, the book, I didn't just reflect on my very own experience in it. My experience is the seed of the book, but I also thought about other mothers in my vicinity who were dealing with that inability to mother for a time in some way, and so not everything there would be recognizable to my child. But I did write. There's a long poem in the book called it's the Inner Harbor neighborhood, but everyone calls it Skeleton Park. It has a long title too, and I did intend that it is a poem that takes place in health before the crisis happens, as a sort of a love poem to the child, and also a memory of that period. And so that's the one that I would say she could read and just absorb. And the others, I'm very aware that what I'm reflecting on is her story too, and will be told very differently by her at different stages of her life. And so I would be interested, but it certainly doesn't have to be a shared narrative between us. I'd be interested in what she thinks down the road. Yeah.
So great answer. So I just was wondering about your process of writing a poem. If there is a typical process for you, do you tend to sort of conceive of it and have the shape of it at the outset? Do you agonize over the lines? And I'll just jump in on behalf of all writers everywhere here and say I hope so. But if you're going to say, what's it like for you?
I tend to work fairly sonically at first. Usually I get a phrase or two going in my mind that I know a poem will form around. And so no, I don't see, unless I'm working purposely in a pre-existing form, I don't see the form at first. I'm sort of sounding it out to myself. Like sometimes I hear the bars of the poem without knowing what the words are going to be yet. I can sort of hear the tune of it, which doesn't mean that I'm not paying attention to meaning or to the ideas of it, but that's the root. The root is definitely it's an auditory beginning to it. Yeah, and yeah, I agonize for sure, of course, and even could rewrite some of what's in the book, I'm sure, but that's an ongoing thing, right? You take those challenges onto your next work and try to do more, go deeper. Yeah.
Right. Great. Well, I just we have one more question, and it's just about your next book, which I think is a collection of essays. Can you tell us a little bit about that project?
Sure. Just quickly, yeah. Well, so when I wrote my first book of poems, a couple of times it came up in interviews that people could hear the reader said they could hear some of my first language in the poems. So I started out speaking Dutch and I learned English, or became like fluent in English young, like say between the ages of 9 and 12 approximately. And so the idea that that first language was still influencing my writing was like, it interested me, but I also realized I couldn't really answer their questions very well at the time about how it played into my writing. I really wasn't all that sure. And also the answer then seemed to go into 100 directions when I tried. So that's what this next book is I took the time to reflect on that question in a series of essays. It's called Alphabet because there are 26 little essays about that transition that I made in languages and how I live with it now.
So interesting. Thank you. Do you translate work from Dutch or to Dutch?
Yeah, I haven't published any translations, but I do it for myself for sure.
Oh, okay, great. Great. Well, thanks for the questions that came, and thank you for your wonderful answers. For those who would like to purchase a copy of The Outer Wards, and we certainly encourage you to do that, you can find the book on All Lit Up for 20% off until May 26th with the promo code Reading Room. Just enter that code when you check out. And we're going to drop the link to the All Lit Up page where you can buy the book into the chat box.
Thank you so much, Laura. Really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Thank you. Okay, so I think we've shared the link to the chat box and you can access it there. It's also in the PDF program that we supplied prior to the event today. Also, of course, you can find a copy of the book from your local indie bookseller. In the chat box, we will share a link to our handy map. You've probably seen it. It's been shared a lot, like thousands and thousands of times online, which Don Gorman at Rocky Mountain Books created. It's a map of indie bookstores that are right now offering delivery and curbside pickup during the pandemic. So you can order from your local. And then another way to purchase the book is, of course, directly from Véhicule Press's website. So thanks again to Sadiqa and Véhicule Press for being here with us today. And I would now like to turn to our second book and its author and introduce Daniela Elza. She will read a selection from her book, The Broken Boat, which is out this spring from Mother Tongue Publishing. Daniela Elza's poetry collections are The Weight of Dew, The Book of It, and Milk Tooth Bane Bone. Her poems have won numerous contests and have been nominated for the Pushcart Prize and the Best of Net anthology multiple times. Her essay, Bringing the Roots Home, was nominated for the 2018 Pushcart Prize as well. Her essay, called Is This an Accident or an Illness?, was shortlisted in the 2019 Event Nonfiction Contest. Born and raised between 3 continents, Daniela is used to crossing borders and dwelling in liminal and in-between spaces. The Broken Boat is her 4th book of poetry, and she lives in Vancouver. So about the book, in her new book, Daniela deftly builds a raft of questions to stay afloat amidst the breakage of things. The end of a 20-year marriage mirrors subtler fragmentations in our world. How to survive this loss of meaning, this wintering through. The intricacies of light, nature, water, absences, glint through grief to astonish and lift the heart into understanding again, transforming and coupling the deeper self with the soulful erosions of our world. Please, everyone, welcome Daniela Elza. You're muted, Daniela.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you, Mandy and Layla, for organizing this event. It's a delight to be here. Thank you, Sadiqa, for your reading. I saw so many little threads weaving through our books. So I'll read from The Broken Boat today. The Broken Boat is a book that began with questions, and the questions we're asked of not of the mind so much as the more visceral body, or whatever that is, the heart, or wherever it is located. I will read 2 poems and 2 fragments. The bulk of the book is in the idea behind is self-portraits, which is the way I could talk about this without infringing on another's space. We'll start with rearranging ourselves. At the bottom of the garden path, and reason crumbles. Here we begin, under the fluorescent lights of our losses, our so much grief. The propane tank up on the hill looks like a pill the hill has swallowed. I never knew what to do for my redemption, always got bogged down with the facts, the scrubbing of plots and pans. What happened, happened. How we often rearrange ourselves to fit in the gardens of our grieving. Buds blossom behind our eyes. Who's to say? This wife might as well have been mistaken for a hat, and she mistook her husband for a bear, shot at him. Memory is not perfect in the mind, but the body knows a premature good night, easily locates itself, adorns with the damned and hopeful forget-me-nots, the delicate stems of denial. And the words between lie exhausted after the midnight romp, broken and twisted on our trampled bed of flowers. Memory stands sentinel. Ghostly trees I keep brushing by, gray, white, windblown. In this bog, we are bound to get snagged on them. A strange kind of love, while the mind never ceases to claim and measure distances. Spare me the facts. When something dies, see what we do with it. Here, pressed flowers in a book. Here, something pressed under glass. Here, the alpine taxidermy. And here is us. What went wrong, went wrong. I never had a chance to rehearse this life with you. Slowly, objects in the house emptied of dreams, we moved them around in our absences. Even the furniture plays visual tricks on us. I fall asleep in one place, wake up in another. The silences between us split at the seams into loneliness. The body wears it with a lack of understanding. Even our ghosts are listless, stare hopelessly, take bets on us. I stand on these stairs, exhausted, liturgical, unsure. Was it up? Oh, was it down we were going? Our silences are geometric confessions now, acquire more sharp angles each time. Metaphors are innocuous until we use the wrong one. There are no hinges to count on, no formulas to apply safely. I am looking for the man I saw the first time I met you. And the narrative circles. See my story leaning away from yours. At the end, no one knows what happened. As if this is some kind of inoculation against grief, these snapshots we take in the dark. In the morning, we develop negatives. See dark where light used to be. And I'll finish with autobiography of grief. The copper snowflakes, the broken boat in which we sleep with our backs to each other. Self-portrait with bird, replicated. Over and over, a vow cast in the heaviest of steel at the center of our room. There is no parting. In the latest unfinished sentence, the image floats homeless until someone walks away. Church bells briefly disperse the noise of the city, a city hammered out of copper and clay, each morning snapped tight on the forehead. feet nailed to a floor they know too well. Each day, an altar in the corner burns hope as if it were lamp oil. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniela. That was just wonderful. Couple questions now, if we may.
Yes, please.
And everyone, just a reminder, while I'm asking the first question, if you have questions, please drop them into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. So starting off, can you tell us a little bit about the brokenness the title alludes to, the many ways that relationships can fracture, the relationships that you're talking about? How did this concept of brokenness inspire the book?
Well, it was started with a 20-year marriage falling apart over a decade. So that's why the timing of the poems was over time. Most of the self-portraits were written on my rooftop patio when things happened, and that was it. That was like, the mind tells you keep your family together, and then when you know it's not possible, then you turn around and say, well, you ask different questions. And so that's where that began. But at the same time, my kids now are in almost 20. My young one is 19 and my older one is 23. I watched them trying to build relationships, and I can see how we have eroded our communications. And that was one. Of course, we're in an environmental crisis, and of course, we're in a very broken time right now with the pandemic. So the broken boat came out at a broken time as well. But most of all, it was about how we know through the body, and how the body teaches us, and how even the meaning of words gets redefined through the body, because the body somehow alerts you that, wait a minute, honey doesn't mean what it used to mean, or how we might not include you. So I'm not sure if that answers your questions, but it's an attempt, a beginning.
Yeah, no, it's a wonderful attempt, and I appreciate the candor. So I just want to turn for a moment to thinking about structure. Your book has distinct sections, a number of sections. There's sort of a through line all the way, but there's also images that repeat and kind of circle back. What were you thinking about in structuring it that way and ordering the poems the way you did?
Well, this is the fun part about writing, is that you don't have to know everything. And sometimes you know half of what you're doing, I hope, and the rest is the gift. And I was surprised myself with some of the images that snuck up in this book. For instance, my friend noticed some of the religious terminologies, which surprised me because I wasn't raised in any denomination or religion. And I was surprised too, but maybe there is something in the Christian Orthodox that I grew up with, my grandparents and my mother and father, who weren't really religious themselves. But yeah, that's a puzzle to savor, because I'm still beginning to see the echoes and the leitmotifs that have strung themselves through, as well as water and domestic. My other books are very different from this one. And so the whole point was that I did not interfere with the images that wanted to appear. And I was surprised myself how they were true, and they stayed true to themselves.
That's so interesting. I think earlier when we were talking about it, you mentioned too, the circles of grief were kind of dictating.
Yeah, a lot of art ends up in this book, poems inspired by art. And one of the sections, the section kind of circle, there's a narrative, but at the same time I was trying really hard. That was the structure of the book, wrangled over that. How do you sustain this grief coming back while at the same time you present a narrative arc of some kind? And I was fascinated with how it kept coming back, and I wanted to preserve that. And so thanks to my publisher, who, after I handed her a bunch of poems, she managed to see through that and help me navigate that space a little better, because after a while you're so close, you can't distinguish these anymore. So there's a more surreal section through which we go through, which everything, you lose your footing, and homelessness, you become homeless and your home leaves you, which is was written to an art installation in Vancouver in the Jewish Community Center, to all those pictures. So it's the section in which you are kind of in between these worlds, and how things appear in your dreams, and how even your dreams betray you, because now you can't even rest even in your dreams.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's great. That's really interesting. I'm curious. Almost all of the poems, I think, maybe all of them, have really visual elements in the lines. Like you use caesura or breaks in the line so that the reader perceives not only words and meanings, but actual shapes in the text. And similarly, your use of punctuation, the way you show us the words inside of words, it just is a delight. We see, for example, the eros in the word erosion, and motion in emotion, and tension in the word pretension. To me, they read like echoes, but I'd like to hear a little bit about your intentions in using these elements, and also, how do you get that across when you're reading the poem aloud in the performance? Now that we've seen you, I kind of feel like it is coming across, but how do you think about that when that's such a visual element?
That's a great question. I love playing with language. I don't belong to any school of poetry, I don't think. I try to use as many of the tools we have. My relationship with language is old, and I have a linguistic background, and I cannot resist playing with words within words. But the big idea behind that, I hope, is more of being aware how language shapes our thoughts, and at the same time, how we as writers keep pushing language to serve us, to say something we want. But there's a constant tension there. And the echoes, to me, are important because visually, that gives the visual reader, gives them a different space to experience language. And when we are, of course, I still am trying to live up to my to the reading on the page, but I do think they're different experiences. And when we're listening in different ways, but we do hear the words as well, the echoes inside the words. So that's the general gist of that, is that the awareness. And there's one section in which I ask the words to be quiet for a while, because they're messing us up. They shift underneath us, they change, and I need to grieve properly. And language wasn't helpful at that moment. And I subvert even the self-portraits themselves, because I cannot hold the narrative or hold a grip on somebody else's world, and even my own, because we change and we shift, just like language. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, that was really illuminating, actually. And I guess the final question I have for you, Daniela, is you're also a teacher, and we know that you organize a lot of literary community events. How do those other activities feed your poetry?
Oh, right now they just take my time away from writing.
Or
Well, yeah, I cannot not be a teacher, and I'm a mom, and right now we're teaching online, and it's pretty intense and exhausting. How do they feed in my poetry? Sometimes they don't, but a lot of the times it's just everything that you have to hold, and you let that like precipitate, like the way sand purifies water. And so this is my sand.
okay, got it. That's great. That is wonderful. Well, thank you very much. And again, we're going to tell you how to buy the books. So we encourage you to grab a copy of The Broken Boat from All Lit Up. And we're going to share the link again in the chat box right now. And again, you can also find it in your PDF program. Just like our other books tonight, The Broken Boat is 20% off until May 26th. If you use the promo code Reading Room, that's Reading Room in all caps. And again, you can find a copy at your local indie bookseller, and just look at the map, follow the link to the map of all the indies that are delivering right now, and we're very grateful to them. So thanks again, Daniela, and thanks to Mother Tongue Publishing for being here with us today.
Thank you for listening.
And now it's my distinct pleasure to introduce our third author of the evening, Betsy Warland. She will be reading from her new collection of prose poems, Lost Lagoon, Lost in Thought, which is published by Véhicule Press. Betsy Warland has published 13 books of poetry, creative nonfiction, and lyric prose. Her 2010 book of essays on new approaches to writing, which was called Breathing the Page, Reading the Act of Writing, became a bestseller. Author, mentor, teacher, manuscript consultant, and editor, Warland received the City of Vancouver Mayor's Award for Literary Excellence in 2016. She is the director of Vancouver Manuscript Intensive, co-founder of the National Creative Writing Nonfiction Collective, and established the Writer's Studio at Simon Fraser University, where she was the director of the program from 2001 to 2012, as well as a mentor in the program from 2001 to 2003 and 2005, and remains on the Writer's Studio teaching faculty. I just want to insert a comment about Creative Writing Nonfiction Collective, which I stumbled across a few years ago. If most of you probably are familiar with it, if you're not, look them up. There's an annual conference and just a wonderful community of writers. And I was fortunate to be able to go to one of the conferences a couple of years ago. So that's a lot of literary community service that we see there. Lost Lagoon, Lost in Thought is Warland's most recent book, published in winter 2020. And there's another book coming out this year. Long considered one of Warland's most intimate and enduring works, Bloodroot, Tracing the Untelling of Mother Loss, is a journey in blank spaces. Told in fleeting vignettes, Warland uses experimental prose to wrestle with the loss, both physical and profound. In doing so, she explores the ways that death by its nature evades articulation. In a new long essay for the 20th anniversary of the work, the author speaks to this unique format and shares revelations upon revisiting the work 2 decades later, including insights into her mother's traumatic past. This book will be published by Inanna Publications in the fall. So about Lost Lagoon. After moving to Vancouver's West End in 2014, the human is drawn to a small body of water called Lost Lagoon in Stanley Park. Daytime visits with a surprising array of wildlife are quietly revelatory. But so is suddenly waking in the night when owl hoots or geese startle in alarm at otter on the prowl. The human savors this up-close relationship between wildlife and fast-paced urban living, questioning the interface between the urban and natural world. Please welcome Betsy Warland.
Hello. Start my video later. Should I click on that and start my video? All right. It's quite lovely to go last because it's just quite very moving to be with poets. And Laura, you've got wonderful questions. You must write poetry yourself. I just feel, I'm just really struck by how in times like this that are so hard and challenging on every level and are so important, how much poetry actually can shift us out of that kind of language as a medium for deception or self-hypnosis, or what are the various kinds of ways that are quite different than what happens in poetry. So I'm really glad to be here today with you all. I'm going to read 3 pieces from Lost Lagoon. Number 1. The human is at a loss for words, considers and considers, wonders. Is this loss of words perhaps why the human is a writer? This desire to describe something that the human cherishes makes words scatter like a flock of startled bush tits. The very word cherishes is suspect. Passé. Okay, the human thinks again. Let's begin with its name, Lost Lagoon. Its very name is a conundrum. How can one misplace a lagoon? Standing on the shore, any passerby can observe it's not a lagoon, but a small lake, perhaps a pond. Over the decades, the human has walked around the lagoon, chatting with various companions, but now dwelling close to it, lives with it. The difference between around and with. Difference between pointing with a camera, voice, or index finger and standing still, watching, listening, sniffing, occasionally speaking softly or returning a bird's call. Just across the street from the high and low-rise buildings, Cheek and Jalnus, Lost Lagoon life is, once again, the human is at a loss for words. The lagoon resists being depicted, summed up. The human admires this. Number 23. When I first plied paddle across gunwale of a light canoe and idled on the margin, I named the sheltered little cove Lost Lagoon. This was just to please my own fancy, for as that perfect summer month drifted on, the ever-restless tides left the harbor devoid of any water at my favorite canoeing hour, and my pet idling place was lost. Pauline Johnson. Faceted sunlight on water, words floating on the page. I'm going to read that again. Faceted sunlight on water, words floating on the page. Written language is a relatively new form of communication that dates back 5,000 to 6,000 years. Lost Lagoon was known as gets dry at times by the Squamish, an artificial captive body of water by Stanley Park Ecological Society, and little more than a brackish tidal flat, unsightly, actually smelly, by the locals. With the invention of written language, humans acquired the power to define and disseminate our biases, points of view, prejudices, knowledge, and ignorance. The alphabet became the real. Even when the humans encountered the embodied real, their written set of lines predetermined what they saw. Number 51. August 2018. Once again, quote, very high health risk, air quality, warning for a week. Windows are closed despite the temperature, particle masks worn inside and out, advisory warnings for people with particular health conditions constantly repeated. Visibility is greatly reduced. Birds seem absent, almost hardly seen flying, rarely heard. People refrain from outdoor sports and as much as possible, even walking. When seen, appear to be walking as if in a trance. Vancouver gains another top world city rating, the most polluted for a week. PM 2.5 ratings are constantly checked. Particle matter containing pollutants from almost 600 fires burning out of control to the north and the east. Particles are comprised of carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxides, volatile compounds, and trace amounts of heavy metals, and are so infinitesimal, 2.5 micrometers, contrasted to a human hair, 70 micrometers, that they penetrate even with windows and doors closed. Imagine a winter's snowstorm whiteout. Imagine a total blackout, the 48-hour one on the Canadian Northeast and US Eastern Seaboard in 2003. The city's completely dark. The only movement, rivers of people walking. Now imagine this, a total grayout for a week, sun and moon utterly obscured. Rachel Carson comes to mind. Silent Spring, published 56 years ago, dismissed, derided, Carson vilified by the chemical industry and their government cronies. While the human has written this tale, has elation for Lost Lagoon become elegy? Tattoo. This is sign language. That's it.
Thank you, Betsy.
You're welcome.
So to all of our audience, you know the drill.
Yeah.
It'd be great to drop your questions into the Q&A box. And I'll start off with a question for Betsy. So can you tell us about the narrative position you have taken in these poems? Throughout, we see the world of the Lost Lagoon from the perspective of the human. Who is the human, and why did you choose this viewpoint for the poem speaker as opposed to an I, for example?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, it came to me in the first number one, the human, and it just felt so. It had a kind of honesty about it that I thought, I think if I'm going to write about this, this is where my narrative position needs to be. Also because having living by the lagoon and spending a lot of time with it, it's become so much more aware. I'm much more aware of how my presence, even though I'm very gentle and quiet and really observant, so I'm the human. I'm not she or he or Betsy or any of those things. I'm the human. Here comes the human, and are you going to, everyone's cautious, all the beings, animals are cautious, some more than others. But they know as soon as we enter the scene, they have to be alert. Mm. And so I realized that to call myself I or she or Betsy was a conceit. It wasn't accurate. It wasn't true to the in fact felt experience. And so it was important to speak from that place of acknowledging that. So, and I found initially when I showed it to a few of the first pieces to some of my writer and reading friends and artist friends that are my first readers, some of them really liked it and some did not like it. And that was also interesting to me because I thought, that must be the right thing to be. That must be the right narrative position because it was creating quite strong reactions. So now some of the people who did not like it have changed their relationship to that reactivity and don't feel that way anymore. So I just think that the human is so we are so over dominating the world and the natural environment that we are so dependent upon and from which we arise. And so it feels really important to not fool ourselves in terms of our impact. Yeah.
So interesting. Thank you for that. In the book, you talk about your starting point being Pauline Johnson's naming of the body of water that is still to this day called the Lost Lagoon.
Mm.
Others since then have tried to name it and define it. I think the piece you read actually
Yes.
had a little bit of that. So how do you view your own exploration in turn? Now it's your turn, you're exploring it. Is it in conversation with these other explorers, or is it an update, or just another angle and way in to the place?
It's interesting. I didn't know that Pauline had named it for a while. Was quite well into the manuscript, and I was doing research from time to time to find out what's been written about Lost Lagoon. Hardly anything. Practically nothing, almost. And so I was really surprised by that. I was trying to get a bit of the history, about, how, because there were many, by the humans, other humans wanting to fill it in and make it a sports field and do all kinds of bizarre things, to kind of erase it, basically. That's pretty much I was basically realized I had to rely on my own personal experience. And what became apparent to me over time, because I've also been involved in some other literary based activities around the environment in the last while. And it became apparent to me over time that that's maybe that's maybe one of the most accessible and moving ways into our feeling overwhelmed about climate change and feeling helpless and all those things, is to establish that one-on-one intimacy again, that very simple thing of going for walks and being in nature and really being in it, like paying 100% attention to it. And that was actually a portal for hope, and a portal for that any one of us, well, not any one of us, most of us have access to in some way or another, So it started to make sense more as time went on when I was writing. Yeah.
So funny. That's just that's kind of a segue into a later question, but I'm going to ask it now. You referenced climate change, urbanization, and the feeling that we're destroying the natural world. And yet what I see you charting in this book is resilience and persistence. And you seem to be reveling in the ways we haven't lost the Lost Lagoon, and despite all the attempts to destroy it. So ultimately, do you see, where are all those signs of hope that you're sort of
Well, this is life, right? It's complicated. So my worry and sadness for it is there's been a fair amount of life that's diminished a lot. And just the 6 years I've been with the lagoon, bird life, the beavers, the fox, the various, there's been a lot of diminishment in terms of the wildlife. But there's still wildlife there. So there's no question about it. But it's really clearly, I've watched it diminish in front of my eyes. That's happening. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, there is this kind of potential for resiliency. So, for example, one of the trees I was so fascinated by, I could not find it in any tree books, and finally I found it, and it's a tree that had existed 400 million years ago, and they thought it was completely gone, and they only found fossils of it, and then it was discovered in a remote valley in China in the 1940s, I think. And so those seeds went around the world. And so now we have several of those. The Dawn Redwood, it's a beautiful tree. It's so graceful and delicate. So those things kind of are reassuring in terms of what can be recovered or what can be adapted. On the other hand, it's also very sobering how much can be lost and how quickly it can be lost. So, for example, the waterfowl in Lost Lagoon, in terms of its variety, it's changed by almost 50% since when I first started going to the lagoon. So, And then you see, the thing is, I have to put in a plug-in for the Canada geese. The thing, both for the beaver and the Canada geese, which are two kind of emblematic. The beaver is it's the image for Canada, and both of them are the most fantastic parents, and they it's just amazing to watch them. The beaver are much reduced. There seems to have been some trapping to remove them from the lagoon, and there's been a debate about this off and on for years. So we didn't see any beaver for quite a while, and we were very sad. The beaver are amazing. There's the old guy, he's there, he's still there, and there seems to be a younger one that's found its way to the lagoon again. So we're really hoping. But these animals, both of the Canada geese and the beavers, they so know how to be caretakers of their offspring. It's amazing. And the Canada geese do a kind of daycare thing, so you'll see exhausted parents on the side kind of going, and you'll see all these little goslings of various different ages, 20, 30 of them, there'll be 2 or 4 other pairs monitoring and watching out for them. While the one set of the parents, has a break for a while. But it's just inspiring to see what nature can teach us about being better humans. It can teach us a lot. And it can affirm also in us what our best instincts are, which sometimes we can get out of touch with.
That's really interesting. So just if I could ask a final question, I guess.
Sure.
So just in thinking about the way that urban streetscape is like sort of just right there next to the lagoon, and the kind of intersections between the urban and rural. And also I noticed that you mentioned that Thoreau's Walden Pond was an inspiration, and that today that is also kind of right up against the city. Is there anything more to say about that? Or just the parallels?
Well, one of the things I love about writing the book and where I live is that the crows have become a major part of my life. And the crows are kind of like the bridge between the two worlds. They live in both the worlds. They don't go very deep into the park, but they're one of the animals that are equally comfortable in both worlds and are very sort of wise and savvy about both worlds. So, and the crow's brain is far more similar to chimpanzees and the human brain than other birds. They are quite a remarkable bird, the crows. So there are ways that I found this. It seems so bizarre to have such wildlife only literally like a block away, and all these high-rise buildings, like this dense urbanization. The West End is still one of the most populated areas in North America per mile. So I found this really intriguing. What's interesting now with the pandemic is there's way more people coming to the park. And you could go to the park here, like in some of the cities like Toronto, you couldn't. Some of the parks, no, if they were really strictly playgrounds, they were just too tempting and they closed those down. But the lagoon and the Stanley Park has been open the whole time. And it has been like an anthill. It's like, it's wonderful because people are finding that it's a place of refuge and they're learning more about it. And they're using the park more like you see people like in Paris or London, or, like European cities where it's almost like the living room of people that are out there, having something to eat and playing chess and all these various things, On the other hand, the lagoon, it's been hard for those of us who are the lagoon lovers because it's sort of like a treadmill sometimes going around the lagoon with joggers and all these people. And it's just, this is life, eh? And when this pandemic is propelling people to the natural world way more, how many of them are actually taking it in a very deep level? I don't know, but at least they're in it now. But like for someone like me, I have to sort of deal with my sense of loss around that in terms of, so I have to be there at 6 a.m. in the morning or find up spots, and so this is life. This is life. Like, there are always these angles right?
Mhm.
So ultimately, I just have found ways to weave around it, you know, and not feel run down by by joggers, and realize the value of it and the importance of it. It's so important. It's a real refuge for people
Mhm.
to
Well,
come
and
to the
speaking
park.
of gifts, you've given us the gift of, capturing it in the,
Yes, yes, yes,
experience. So thank you for
yes,
that.
yes. It's a pleasure.
Thank you very much, Betsy.
Thank you. And LPG, thank you so much. It's really important what you're doing. It's always important what you're doing, but this is really a bonus. So thank you.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
And now it's time to sell the book. So
Good.
to grab your own copy of Lost Lagoon, Lost in Thought, you can order it from All Lit Up, and we're sharing the link in the chat box right now. And of course, it's also in the program that you received. And a reminder, 20% off on this book until May 26th with the promo code Reading Room. And finally, last reminder again about our lovely indie booksellers all across the country who are delivering.
Yes.
And,
Yay.
yay for them, they're heroes. So visit them if you'd prefer, order from your local or have it shipped. And again, we want to thank Betsy Warland and Caitlin Press. And we hope that you enjoyed this reading room event. There's more to come this month, and we'll share links to those events on our social media as they come up. So just a little highlight, next up on Friday at 2 p.m., just the end of this week, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, we are taking a look at radical politics, youth in war and conflict, and youth action through fictional lenses. We will be hosting authors Sarah Harar Murphy and Hassan Getty Santur reading from their new books, which are out from Guernica and Moenzi House, respectively. So that's Friday. And then next Tuesday evening, we are going to feature 2 debut novels with the theme of parental illness, spotlighting John Elizabeth Stinzey's book, Vanishing Monuments, which is from Arsenal Pulp Press, and Fawn Parker's Set Point, which is from ARP. We are so excited to be bringing these new books to you. And finally, if you are not already following us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, please do so. What are you waiting for? Our handle for all platforms is All Lit Up Canada. And let me just add, in the most heartfelt way possible, #ReadIndie, #BooksAreEssential. And I want to thank again our authors and to all the publishers, Véhicule, Mother Tongue, and Caitlin Press, who helped make this event happen. Everyone, we wish you all a great rest of your evening, and thanks. Good night.